The reign of Alexander II, Tsar of Russia from 1855 to 1881, marked a period of profound transformation within the vast Russian Empire. His rule came at a time when Russia was grappling with numerous internal and external challenges, necessitating a visionary leader who could navigate the complexities of the era. Known as the Reformer Tsar, Alexander II embarked on a series of ambitious reforms that aimed to modernize Russia and propel it into a new era. His vision was to transform the archaic structures of Russian society and bring about a more progressive and equitable system. His reforms touched upon nearly every aspect of Russian life, from the emancipation of the serfs to the restructuring of the judicial system. The emancipation of the serfs in 1861 was particularly groundbreaking, as it sought to liberate millions of peasants from centuries of bondage and feudal oppression. His reign was a complex tapestry of progress and reaction, ultimately culminating in his tragic assassination. The forces of change he unleashed were met with resistance from conservative elements within society, leading to a turbulent and often violent period in Russian history. Alexander's legacy remains a subject of debate among historians. Some view him as a visionary leader who laid the groundwork for modern Russia, while others criticize his reforms as being too limited and failing to address the root causes of social unrest. Some argue that his reforms were incomplete and ultimately failed to address the deep-seated social and political issues plaguing Russia. The discontent among the peasantry and the rise of revolutionary movements were seen as evidence of the limitations of his policies. Others maintain that his reforms were nothing short of revolutionary, laying the groundwork for Russia's eventual modernization. They argue that his efforts to modernize the economy, improve infrastructure, and promote education were crucial steps towards a more developed and prosperous nation. Regardless of perspective, there is no denying that Alexander II's reign was a pivotal period in Russian history. His efforts to reform and modernize the country had far-reaching implications, influencing the course of Russian history for decades to come. This essay will delve into the life and times of Alexander II, exploring the context of his rule, the nature and impact of his reforms, and the reasons behind his assassination. It will examine the challenges he faced, the opposition he encountered, and the legacy he left behind. It will shed light on the complexities of his legacy and his enduring significance as a key figure in Russian history. Through this exploration, we aim to provide a comprehensive understanding of Alexander II's contributions and the lasting impact of his reign. To understand the significance of Alexander II's reforms, it is essential to grasp the state of Russia in the mid-19th century. This period was marked by a stark contrast between the grandeur of the Russian Empire and the harsh realities faced by its people. Russia at this time was a vast and sprawling empire, lagging behind the rest of Europe in terms of industrialization and modernization. While Western Europe was experiencing rapid industrial growth, Russia remained predominantly agrarian. The vast majority of the population lived in rural areas bound by the feudal system of serfdom. This system had been in place for centuries, and it kept millions of peasants in a state of perpetual poverty and subjugation. Serfdom, in essence, was a form of legal slavery. Serfs were not free to leave the land they worked on and were subject to the whims of their landowners. Millions of peasants were tied to the land, their lives and labor controlled by their landowners. They had little hope of improving their circumstances or escaping their harsh conditions. This system stifled economic growth and created a vast underclass with limited rights or opportunities. The lack of mobility and innovation hindered Russia's ability to compete with the rapidly advancing nations of Western Europe. The Crimean War from 1853 to 1856, a humiliating defeat for Russia at the hands of Britain, France, and the Ottoman Empire, exposed the stark backwardness of Russia's military and economic systems. The war highlighted the inefficiencies and inadequacies of the Russian state. The defeat in Crimea served as a wake-up call for the Russian elite. It became clear that the status quo was unsustainable and that significant changes were necessary to prevent further decline. It became abundantly clear that without significant reforms, Russia risked falling further behind the West and becoming vulnerable to both internal and external threats. The pressure to modernize was immense, and the need for reform was undeniable. Alexander II, who ascended to the throne in the midst of this crisis, recognized the urgent need for change. He understood that the future of Russia depended on its ability to adapt and modernize. He inherited a country on the brink of transformation, burdened by the legacy of serfdom and the growing pressures of modernization. Alexander II's reign would be defined by his efforts to navigate these challenges and steer Russia towards a new era of progress and reform. Alexander Nikolaevich Romanov was born in Moscow in 1818, the eldest son of Tsar Nicholas I. From a young age, Alexander was groomed for leadership, surrounded by the grandeur and strict protocols of the Russian court. His early life was a blend of privilege and rigorous discipline, a duality that would shape his future reign. His upbringing was steeped in the traditions of autocracy, but he also received a well-rounded education that exposed him to liberal ideas. This education was not just about academics, it was a comprehensive preparation for the complexities of ruling a vast empire. He was taught history, languages, and the intricacies of governance. His tutors included the poet Vasily Zhukovsky, a proponent of enlightened absolutism, who instilled in the young Alexander a sense of duty and a belief in the need for gradual reform from above. Zhukovsky's influence was profound, encouraging Alexander to think beyond the rigid confines of autocracy and consider the welfare of his people. Alexander's early years were marked by his father's strict and often repressive rule. Nicholas I was a formidable figure whose reign was characterized by a relentless pursuit of order and control. This environment of strict discipline left a lasting impression on Alexander, shaping his views on governance. Nicholas I, known for his staunch conservatism and his suppression of dissent, instilled in his son a deep respect for order and authority. He believed that a strong centralized power was essential to maintaining the stability of the empire. This belief was passed down to Alexander, who would later grapple with balancing authority and reform. However, Alexander also witnessed firsthand the limitations of his father's autocratic approach, particularly in the aftermath of the Crimean War. The war was a turning point, revealing the weaknesses of the Russian military and the inefficiencies of the autocratic system. It was a harsh lesson in the need for change. Upon ascending to the throne in 1855, Alexander faced the daunting task of leading Russia out of the Crimean War and into a new era. His coronation marked the beginning of a reign that would be defined by efforts to modernize and reform the Russian state. The war had not only exposed Russia's weaknesses, but had also exacerbated internal tensions, creating a climate ripe for change. The social and economic strains were evident, and Alexander understood that maintaining the status quo was no longer viable. Alexander, acutely aware of the need for modernization, declared his intention to embark on a path of reform, stating famously, "It is better to abolish serfdom from above than to wait until it begins to abolish itself from below." This declaration set the stage for a series of transformative changes that would redefine Russia's social and political landscape. The defining act of Alexander II's reign, the one for which he is most remembered, was undoubtedly the emancipation of the serfs in 1861. This momentous act, which impacted millions of Russians, abolished centuries of serfdom and marked a turning point in Russian history. The Emancipation Edict was a complex piece of legislation, reflecting the delicate balance Alexander had to strike between appeasing the demands for reform and placating the interests of the powerful landowning nobility. The emancipation process was not without its flaws. While peasants were granted personal freedom and the right to own land, they were often given the poorest plots and saddled with redemption payments to compensate their former owners. This created new challenges and inequalities, as many peasants found themselves trapped in a cycle of debt and poverty. Despite its limitations, the emancipation of the serfs was a watershed moment in Russian history. It struck at the heart of the old feudal order, paving the way for the development of a more modern and dynamic society. The emancipation had profound social and economic consequences, fostering the growth of a free peasantry, promoting industrialization, and ultimately contributing to the rise of a new urban working class.